Hello there, and welcome to another marvelous anime. Today, we're exploring the origins and the method behind the madness of a highly overlooked villain in anime, Hellsing Ultimate's The Major. Now, there are all sorts of villains, and they usually have more or less the same sorts of motivations, ranging from world domination, power politics, sinister personal agendas, or just some good old-fashioned revenge. Alfred Pennyworth in The Dark Knight makes a small yet impactful comment on the Joker's motivations to light up Gotham in chaos as Bruce Wayne struggles to find a motive for his crime. Alfred says, "Some men just want to watch the world burn." Anime has what might even be a more ambitious and menacing answer to the Joker with The Major. He loves the chaos of war and the mindless killings that follow, to the extent of flaunting it with an enigmatic charm that will surely send the chills down any hardened criminal's spine. But what helps The Major from Hellsing Ultimate stand out in the great and expansive pantheon of villains in the world of anime is something else. It's his twisted humanity. And in this video, we're going to explore just why that's the case. Before we go about dissecting the Major's origins, who is the Major in Hellsing Ultimate? The real puppet master behind the scenes. What do you get when you combine a warmongering World War II veteran with a good dose of narcissism? The perfect opposite of every major Hellsing Ultimate character that's trying to fight and keep some balance in the world. Well, Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate carve out their niche for some really badass characters with some amazingly badass moves. Their conflicts and face-offs are merely floating on the surface for what Hellsing Ultimate finally reveals. That the worst monsters in the world aren't the vampires, werewolves, or ghouls written about in stories, it's humanity itself. The Major's story arc and character builds with this idea coming to life in Hellsing Ultimate. If there's just one thing that even the Major realized, it's that the world cannot be set on a path to war without justified reasons. The reasons need to justify the war and should crumble the world's peacekeeping forces. From an occult perspective, it's the Hellsing organization that is majorly tasked by Britain to keep its streets clean and out of supernatural troubles. But we all know from the start that the Hellsing organization's key weapon, Alucard, is the vampire of the first origin that no other supernatural being would dare cross paths with. At the beginning of the series, we see Hellsing cleaning up more vampire attacks than usual, and there's clearly something different about these recent attacks and their targeted nature, which leads to Sir Integra's discovery. She discovers that the vampires used in these attacks are not in any way natural. These are artificial vampires created with the use of an implanted chip, a technological vampire variant that seems to be on the loose in London. While that makes no difference to Alucard and his newly recruited vampire Cerys Victoria's missions in terms of power differences, the problem isn't just eliminating these artificial vampires and the ghouls they leave behind. The real problem is to understand who is creating them and why. The key to the solution, as the Hellsing organization realizes, is to uncover the conspiracy and stop the perpetrator. This is when the Valentine brothers figure in and launch a full frontal attack on the Hellsing Manor at a time when the Round Table Conference with the Knights of Britain is ongoing. Britain is close to losing its faith in the Hellsing organization, and this attack by the Valentine brothers felt like the nail in the coffin of the Hellsing organization. Sir Integra always talked a big game about her organization's work and its importance, but she had somehow failed to predict a highly coordinated attack by artificial vampires and ghouls on her home turf, and she loses all her human fighting forces as a result. Though Integra manages to quell the attack with Alucard, Cerys, and Walter's assistance, the Valentine brothers' attack becomes the right catalyst for the Major's appearance. He steps out of the shadows with the Millennium Organization, and in the bargain, also kills all German Heer officers that might oppose his plans, because why spare any competition if it comes from your own ranks, right? No. The Major, unlike his peers in the German Heer, is no longer interested in carrying the last will and testament of Hitler's Fourth Reich anymore. What the Major wants is his tyranny of the eternal global war, starting with the attack on London. Before you know it, the Major and his Millennium Militia of enhanced artificial vampire Nazi soldiers descend on London by hijacking a Royal Navy carrier and jamming all communication lines of the British military. This makes the British military incapable of accessing anyone on the ground in London. But all is not lost, as the Hellsing organization soon uncovers the Major and the Millennium Organization's role in the attacks on Hellsing Manor in London through the Millennium's envoy and warrant officer, Schrödinger. Schrödinger's uncertain circumstances of death soon become a disadvantage for Alucard and a major advantage for the Major. The Major's ultimate love for war. why he wants to watch the world burn. To understand a man's actions, we must first understand their motivations, for they tell us what kind of character that man has. When you put the Major underneath the lens we just spoke of, all you'll see in the motivation column is the word war. The Major's own unreasonable thirst for chaos and war are far beyond reason and moral judgments. The prime evidence is no doubt the Major's monologue on his sadistic love for war in the infamous speech, "I love war." The Major's origins date back to a Nazi patriot who has neither any compunction nor concept of good or evil, or even just a gray area for exceptions. He's proud and so vain in his love for war that the Major doesn't love war to win battles for his own side. He loves war because for him, watching the chaos of it is like a pleasure ride that just doesn't stop. Whether it's soldiers dying from his own ranks or from the enemy's, the Major wants a high from the most unspeakable acts of brutality in war, and it can also come at the cost of his own men dying at the hands of a Russian battalion. But the Major will shed no tears for his brave soldiers. Instead, he'll enjoy every soldier's body exploding regardless of which side they're from. Yes, he wants to win the war without a doubt, but more than winning, the Major goes on to explain the graphic details of every single horror that can possibly happen in a war, and how it puts him in a state of ecstasy every time. Be it blitzkriegs, tanks blowing up homes, women and children being assaulted in defenseless villages, deserters being tortured to death, prisoners of war begging for a quick death, or his own men being blown to smithereens on the battlefield and his trenches overrunning with death and agony. The Major just loves every horror that can be wreaked upon humanity. There is no war ethic that he's willing to follow if it doesn't put him in a state of sheer blood-soaked euphoria and frenzy. For the Major, witnessing the horrors of war unwind is like sitting in the front row seats for a grand symphonic masterpiece created just for him. And this symphony of war is his highest form of fulfillment in life that is not always played to his tune. When it comes to a goal as big as an eternal world war, even Millennium realizes that it's easier said than done. For the Major, an endless war in the world is not just his ultimate goal, but a destination to kill Alucard. The Major even realizes that he can't simply march into the streets of London with the fallen Nazi Germany's now revived Millennium Organization militia and expect a global war to start. This takes us back to why the Major and the Millennium Organization cross paths with the Hellsing Organization instead of just creating a global political crossfire. Why does the Major hate Hellsing? What's his personal grudge against Alucard? Before their fall in World War II, Britain, along with the Hellsing Organization, came together to destroy Hitler's Special Order 666, a direct reference to the number of the beast from the Bible's Book of Revelations. This special order was tasked with research and development of supernatural weaponry and soldiers for Hitler's army. The Hellsing Organization was tasked with shutting down this department and hunting down every member in it, including the Major. This was a task for, you guessed right, Alucard and a young Walter. 13-year-old Walter, accompanied by a ferocious Alucard, finished their mission to report that they have shut down the Special Order 666 and none of the members of this order were left alive. However, that wasn't entirely true. The Major and all other prominent members of the order survived and took refuge in South America with a majority of their soldiers and weaponry. Ever since their escape, the Major had carefully schemed and planned his conspiracy to return to London and start his eternal world war. This particularly devastating raid from the Hellsing family's attack dogs would be enough to justify the Major's hatred for their organization and Alucard. But in the latter's case, it actually goes much deeper than that. The Major used to be an ordinary Nazi concentration camp staffer who was constantly bullied and cornered by his peers in the concentration camps. He was often looked down upon as a weak staffer who was not fit for war and the harsh world that Nazi Germany wanted its soldiers to die for. However, as the Nazi regime came to a close and camps were invaded and attacked, this seemingly weak and harmless staffer had a moment of evolution. Moments before his death, in an altercation with his World War enemies who shot him down, the Major is given a redeeming choice to make that would make him immortal. He is about to die, and when made to choose over death and the immortal life of a vampire, the Major makes a bold statement on why he would never, ever become a vampire. Though this statement reflects a lot of the Major's narcissism, it does stand as his most favored principle of life. The Major's narcissistic view about his humanity, coupled with his Nazi principles, soon becomes the hallmarks of his hatred for vampires or any immortal non-human being in the Hellsing universe. The Major starts with appreciating the sadism and pleasure of being a vampire, the strength their life gives them, and the pleasure vampires experience every time they drink blood. He goes a step further by saying that the connection and the power you have over those you bite as a vampire sounds like a really exciting power to have. But the Major ultimately rejects this idea of control and power and states that if he chooses to become a vampire for an immortal life, he will only be polluting himself. The idea of sharing the blood of his victims and in doing so making their blood, their imperfections, and their defective characteristics a part of himself is a very big treason for the Major against the purity of his own mind and body. A good subtle nod to Nazism lies here when you think about Hitler's obsession with the perfect and pure race of human beings. But the Major might be 10 times worse than Hitler or any vampire you'll see in Hellsing. All major characters draw a line around their agendas and allegiances to different countries, societies, and themselves. Be it Sir Integra's loyalty to Britain and the House Helsing, Father Alexander Anderson's loyalty to the Vatican and God, Sarah's Victoria's loyalty to the Helsing organization and Alucard, and even the other merciless characters in Helsing Ultimate having a boundary that stops at their own agendas and around those of the organizations they serve. But not the Major. He has evolved from an ignored and bullied World War II veteran Nazi to a genocidal warlord and nihilistic narcissist whose only goal is to see the world constantly engaged and burning in war. As if this wasn't enough, his motive to make Britain and the Helsing organization pay for their interference in World War II only adds to the scare factor that would shake up our world if there was someone like the Major keeping a long historic grudge list in his diary of new wars to start. The Major is arguably one of the only characters who willingly rejected the life of a vampire, even when he was hanging by a thread for his life after being shot multiple times during World War II. This matter of principle is grave and serious for the Major, as he sees no one but him and humanity that ought to be respected or even given the place that Alucard enjoys in the world as an immortal. This is a paradox that the Major has with himself. He hates Alucard purely for the reason that Alucard chose to do the opposite of the Major. Alucard transformed from a human to a vampire in his moment of desperation and lost his faith in the possibilities of the human body and mind. It is Alucard's choice to leave his human nature behind for the life and powers of a vampire that convinces the Major that Alucard is the biggest monster there is and should be eliminated at all costs. This paradox of the Major's principles works as the best use of irony in the series. A man who claims that monsters like Alucard need to be eliminated is on a death path himself with the goal of starting an era of undisturbed war in the world. But that isn't the only place where this irony becomes relevant, as you'll see in a bit. How the Major outsmarts Helsing and manages to kill Alucard. Despite being a megalomaniac with a propensity for hatred and violence that would make Conan the Barbarian look like Barney the dinosaur, there's no denying the Major's genius when it comes to the art of war. The Major stayed 10 steps ahead of his competition at all times, to the point that his real plans were unknown even to his own men. Under his directive, the Millennium Organization created what we see from the start of the Helsing series, the electronic chipped artificial vampires. Millennium then starts sending these vampires into British territory bit by bit, while the Helsing organization and Alucard get to work on eliminating these threats immediately. As a consequence of this plan, the ghouls the artificial vampires end up creating with their actions add chaos to the trouble of rising artificial vampire cases. As pawns, the Valentine brothers mount the near-perfect attack on the Helsing Manor to demoralize the British Knights and sabotage their faith in the Helsing organization. This move enables the Major to pit the Helsing organization against Britain, forcing the Helsing organization to come out of the shadows and slowly yet steadily fight harder to stop the spread of artificial vampires on the streets of London. The Major seemingly sets the stage for urban myths and rumors about vampires becoming real terrors in London and forces the Helsing organization to engage, but keeps losing control of the situation. Now that the chaos is unleashed, we would expect a war or civil unrest to say the least, but that's too quick and easy for the Major. The Major is aware of Alucard and the strength he can bring into the war, and initiates the second phase of his plans by sending his ace vampire on the hunt for Alucard. Following the attack by the Valentine brothers, Alucard is attacked by the Major's dandy man, or the infamous playing cards wielding trickster assassin Tubal-Cain Alhambra, on an assassination mission to Brazil. Though a good nemesis, Alhambra isn't strong enough to complete the task and instead lets Alucard interrogate him thoroughly, which is Helsing Organization's code word for Alucard sucking the blood, memories, and soul out of the dandy man. Pretty discreet, but Alucard meets another equally strong nemesis who fails to subdue him. Her name is Rip Van Winkle. Skilled and ferocious, she is another artificial vampire like Alhambra who was used as a pawn to distract Alucard. The Major consistently plays the general game by fighting his war one battle at a time to trap his enemies at the center for a tactic that Nazi Germany utilized, the Blitzkrieg. Though Rip Van Winkle is just a pawn that's sacrificed in the name of trapping Alucard in the middle of the sea, there are some merits to her fight against Alucard, as she tries to hold on to her British-turned Millennium ship Adler. She draws enough fire and gives back enough resistance to hold Alucard away from the British Islands, long enough to let the Major really unleash some mayhem on London. And this is where the Major finally unveils his master plan. With each attempt on Alucard's life, the Major forces him to release his control art restriction system until he's down to level 0. The more Alucard uses this last resort power, the closer he comes to the trap being set by the Major using Schrodinger's body and pushing Alucard in the direction of death. The Major's motivation here isn't simply just the execution of his dream mission and an eternal global war, but also the execution of his most hated enemy. So, once Alucard drains all his familiars to kill every Millennium soldier, transformed human, and even the newly vampirized traitor Walter C. Dornez, he is left with nothing to power himself, and he needs to take in fresh souls to reconstitute. That's when the Major commands Schrodinger to throw himself into the flow of blood Alucard was consuming post-Battle of London. Because Schrodinger can only exist when he's cognizant of his own existence, once Schrodi joined the other 3 million souls Alucard sucked in, he lost his sense of self, which means Alucard also lost his sense of self. And that means that the threat of Helsing's greatest weapon was finally neutralized. The Major knew killing Alucard was practically impossible, so he went for the next best thing, wiping him out of existence. His plan worked for the most part, and he finally managed to prove humanity's superiority over that of an infernal inhuman. But was his victory truly an honest one? Is the Major himself a human being? Here's why the Millennium's War was based on a hypocritical lie. Every mad dictator needs propaganda to motivate their armies to go fight senseless wars, and that's exactly what the Major does with the Millennium Organization. The Major lives for nothing but his twisted idea of the world on fire, but to get there, he needs a conspiracy big enough to start global wars. The premise of the Millennium's War is based on the lie of a world without monsters like Alucard. The Major's personal hatred for Alucard and his immortal vampire life aside, the Major isn't really the human being or champion of human perfection that he sells himself as. The Major's chief propaganda revolves around the idea that human beings are stronger and better than monsters. Similar to Hitler's theory of the Germanic Aryan race being better than the rest of the world, this is exactly the logic the Major uses to wage a new age war against immortal monsters. Because humans, like the Major, are better than immortal monsters like Alucard any day of the week, right? But this whole argument falls flat when you question the operation of the Major and Millennium. Did human beings really fight in the Major's covert war against the Helsing organization and Alucard? Right from the start till the end. The Major has used artificial vampires created with the use of computer chips. His own assigned division dating back to World War II specialized in the research of the occult and supernatural to build better soldiers. This tactic is exactly what sets Millennium on its hypocritical warpath. Artificial vampires, werewolves, and hitmen vampires like the Valentine brothers are all supernatural instruments that the Major used till the end with full effect for his war against monsters. And does the hypocrisy end there? Of course not. As it turns out, the Major's life was saved by the Doctor when he turned him into a cyborg. All in all, his proxy war on the monsters of the world fails miserably and backfires when Alucard comes back to life at the end of the series. Overall, the Major and his principles make for a good villain story, but in the end, it ends up teaching us the same moral lesson on wars. No matter who leads a war or what they lead a war on, nothing good ever comes of it. Least of all, an eternal global war. And that's all there is to the Major story in Helsing Ultimate. A narcissistic mastermind warlord who can definitely give the world a nightmare. In the end though, his hypocrisy became his downfall, though it makes for an interesting clash of titans as the series reaches its finale and a seemingly untouchable immortal like Alucard also faces his life and death moment. One thing's for certain, the Major sent everyone down an unpredictable and unforgettable warpath. Marvelous verdict! Time for the marvelous verdict, and our verdict is that Helsing Ultimate is absolutely grim, scary, and has death written across every episode. If you're looking for badass villains with equally badass heroes, Helsing Ultimate is a mad ride that keeps killing every stereotype of what to expect in the supernatural genre. It's quick, it's personal, it's bloody, and it's crazy with global consequences that would give you goosebumps just imagining them. Brace yourself for Alucard's unstoppable body count and the Major's sheer madness, but based on this video, more of the latter. Until next time, watch out for the vampires on your streets and have a marvelously spooky day.